This ever happened to you? You turn the corner, get met with a face full of fire, and in the kill cam you see the ass that turned you to ash, holding W and M1, squirt shot in the other hand, and in the flaming rage you type into the chat, W plus M1 noob, with zeros instead of O's. But why? This is where we get into the actual philosophical and moral argument for Pyro, and the three schools of thought typically tied to the class. The first group of people are the ones I already described, those who think Pyro lacks any skill, played by noobs just to annoy the real skilled players in the game, sticky spammers. The second are those who will adamantly defend the Pyro at all costs. He does take skill to play, he isn't a bad class, you're just bad. And the final group, those that look at those other two groups and say they got this part right, but this part wrong. Guess what perspective we'll be looking at today? Team Fortress 2 is a class-based shooter. Each class was designed to fit a specific job and role, with a somewhat loose sense on who counters who. I know this may sound shocking to some people in their 4,000 hours in the game, but it's true, guys. Scout is agile enough to maneuver around the map to flank enemies and maximize his damage, but is light enough to also be easily defeated by the other classes. The core here is clear. This guy moves fast to move close to deal damage and flank and needs to outmaneuver enemies. Sniper has a sniper rifle, ideal for picking off select targets at far range but struggles in close range. The core is to sit at the back and snipe important targets. Engineer builds sentries for aerial denial and control, teleports to help his teammates move forward, and dispensers for additional support. And granted, there are certain playstyles and subclasses that alter the core or main design of the class to something else, like Demo Man to Demo Knight, but those classes have their own unique role in the game, which is easy to distinguish and identify. And then there's Pyro. Pyro, much like Scout, was originally designed to be a class that benefits from flanking and ambushing enemies. You gotta be close to hit them after all. But Pyro doesn't exactly excel at that job. He doesn't have the mobility for the most part, and even more importantly, he lacks the damage output to truly benefit from a flank or ambush. Scout outranges and outdamages Pyro. Heavy has the firepower and sheer muscle mass to survive an attack. Reflecting rockets, pipes, or stickies is alright, but most players will be able to shoot them out of air blast range to avoid it while still hitting the Pyro through splash damage. Engineer, even without a sentry gun, has a semi-fair matchup with his shotgun. And against other Pyros, it's more based on luck, or if somebody has a shotgun in that fight. The three classes Pyro can in fact quote-unquote out-damage is Sniper, which is a mashup more reliant on the sniper's skill level rather than the Pyro's. Medic, which requires you to actually be in the quote-unquote crit corner, or surrounded by the other team in a pocket who persists to punish people who play Pyro. And of course, Spy, which admittedly Pyro is the strongest class against.
Pyro is a good class, you brain dead fucking moron. He fights spies and sappers and spies again. He's so cool despite being made of fire or something. I didn't read the lore. Moron and
Whoa, yeah, I agree with you, pal. But you fail to realize the other side of the coin with a statement like that, which is Pyro is only for countering Spy. TF2 isn't like rock, paper, scissors, like what most people believe it to be. Class counters do exist, but they aren't as rigid and concrete as people make them out to be. Can Pyro counter Spy? Yeah, fairly easily, and in most situations as well, but that doesn't mean Pyro should only fight spies. But, with how Pyro is designed to be, it's the only thing he actually excels at. So Pyro is only really good at dealing with spies. Other classes outperform him, and fighting him is extremely easy for a majority of the classes, either because of what weapons they have, or the extremely weak damage output of the stock flamethrower. And as a result, most of Pyro's unlockable weapons have some sort of gimmick to either A, boost that damage, or B, haphazardly smush Pyro into a different role altogether. Pyro, I find, is an incredible outlier to TF2's philosophy of weapons. Literally every other class in the game shares the same idea of weapons deviating from stock, an upside with a pretty noticeable downside. Even if the downside isn't listed in the stats of the weapon, it can still be inferred. The loose cannon greatly restricts Demo's range compared to stock, but has a higher damage potential. The Gru allows Heavy to actually move at a semi-reasonable pace to the front lines but at the loss of HP, meaning he has to be somewhat careful on when to switch out to it. Then we have Pyro. Oh boy. So the Greaser allows you to quickly swap to your melee or secondary, or swap back to it at the cost of 5 more ammo being used for air blasting, and instead of dealing 8 damage from Afterburn, you're dealing 1. Not exactly a trade-off. The upsides rarely ever equal the downside when it comes to Pyro's weapons. To list a few other examples, we have the Power Jack, which gives 15% more movement speed to a class that needs more mobility, with the very minute and negligible downside of 20% increased damage taken. Only while active though, meaning that stat will rarely ever come to effect in combat. And, as an extra little bonus for some reason, killing an enemy with it grants 15 HP. Cause why not? The Back Scratcher, which is Pyro's version of the Scotsman's Skull Cutter, deals 17 more damage compared to stock, but with the downside of receiving 75% less health from healing sources. Wow! So, a weapon that rewards you with more damage for being aggressive, with a downside that also means you have to be careful and limit how aggressive you are. Oh wait, no, because I forgot that the Back Scratcher also gives you 50% more health from health packs, sort of negating the health penalty I mentioned prior. And the Third Degree, I mean, nobody fucking uses it, but it's just a direct upgrade from stock. I don't even have to go into more detail about that one. The most drastic example, and probably the most controversial choice for this really good but no downsides, is the Flog. I want to talk more about the core problems with flamethrowers in general later, but they all fall into the same problem with Pyro. Anyways, the Flog. Deal enough fire damage and you're granted 10 seconds of crits with the pretty harsh penalty of no air blast. Air blasting is without a doubt a powerful tool, do not get me wrong. But when you realize that the Flog is oomph from all sources of fire damage, including sitting in the back of the map and spamming squirt shots, and the reward is to do one of the most hated things in TF2, being WM1 on steroids, you can kinda see why people don't like the weapon. That being said, I think it's one of the more balanced Pyro weapons Pyro has to offer. I don't like how you don't need to use the Flog to get oomph, but aside from that, no air blast and having the taunt to actually activate it allows for some actual careful consideration on when and where to use it. Flare guns have a slow firing speed and aren't effective on other Pyros, but god fucking damn it if they aren't one of the most annoying things in the world. The sheer power the stock flare gun can deal on 2 hits is enough to kill 4 out of the 9 classes, and the Squirt Shot and Detonator rival engineers with the Gunslinger on how fucking annoying they can be. While the flare gun does reward good aim a bit too much, I find, the Squirt Shot and the Detonator, to a lesser extent, reward mediocre aim. Nearly hit the enemy? That's alright, we'll set them on fire for you and reward you for extra damage for it as well. Oh, and don't forget that temporary stun lock. And now we get to the flamethrowers. As mentioned before, they don't deal a whole lot of damage, so how do you maximize that damage? By holding M1, resulting in less experienced players to beeline from where they're staying to you, all while holding it down, resulting in the age-old trope of fucking WM1. Of course, this isn't directly Pyro's fault, it's unfortunately how Valve intended the class to actually deal damage by doing a skillless strat. So you get charged by a Pyro and either A, run away, or B, kill him, but you run into another issue. Afterburn. Ever since the Jungle Inferno buff of how Afterburn affects healing for medics, my patience for the mechanic has slowly been draining. You win the fight and retreat back to get health, just to see your scout at 124 HP steal that medkit in front of you. Thanks, dickhead! Or, even more heartbreaking, you run to a medic or dispenser just to die from someone else pushing, and because you get less health back from healing sources while on fire, you die. I think the damage of Afterburn is fine, but the 10-second duration is quite long, causing people who are on fire to freak out due to how tense it can be. Health slowly ticking away as you pray no one else comes to fight you just for that to happen, resulting in more hate towards Pyro. All in all, however, Afterburn's quite fine. Nothing too drastic to get worked on about, like random crits. But screw random crits, because guaranteed crits are so much worse, and by god does Pyro ever rely on them way too much. Probably a result of that fairly poor damage output. But instead of just slightly buffing that damage to the point Pyro's a viable class, Valve just gave Pyro weapons that crit or mini crit. For example, so 3 out of the 5 primary weapons, 5 out of the 9 secondaries, and 2 out of the 9 melee weapons have ways to ensure either crits or mini crits. Who needs actual ambush tactics or smart play? Just fucking crits. Who needs them? Not good players apparently. What do I know about that? Despite how much I've talked and ranted on Pyro being a fairly weak class and deserving of some hate due to an over-reliance on crits, a pretty low skill ceiling, and of course just generally being a nuisance, he's still an easy class to counter with minimal effort. I think the true issue of Pyro is set within the entire context of the game. Valve went ahead and made a pretty good cake with 8 ingredients. Felt like something else was needed. Went around, looked in the cabinet, and found like fucking mint or something. Added that to the cake, think it would really stand out well and complement the other 8 flavors, only to have that mint taste really weak, and have you ask if they really knew why they added it in the first place. The idea was for Pyro to be a close-range attacker, despite lacking the tools needed to properly fit that role. Valve kinda just kept hand-fisting into weapons that support this ideal while realizing their mistake of Pyro not really having a super well-defined role within the game. They gave him Air Blast, the ability to remove sappers and pester enemies from range. Pyro works much better as a weird support class rather than an offensive one, but Valve still pushes Pyro to be that attacker. An Uber push is one of the most important moments in a game that can easily win or lose the game, and yet, the only class who can considerably counter it is Pyro. Air Blast, although it can be played around by a smart person, is still a decent counter and response to soldiers and demos. If Valve focused less on trying to maximize Pyro's poor damage output with cheap tactics and gimmicks, and focused more on making Pyro a slight support class, I feel as if a lot of the hate and stigma towards him would kinda just vanish. But unfortunately, Valve did try to push that support role with complete failure. The Gas Passer. The Gas Passer sucks, to put it bluntly, but the concept of it is perfect. Throw it at an area, and enemies who walk into the gas can then be ignited by any and all damage types, including the rocket jumper for some reason. This concept allows for Pyro to actually help support the team by temporarily dissuading enemies to go a certain way and punishing them if they do. Typically with the help of teammates, but you could also probably do it solo. Sadly though, someone at Valve thought, what if it was different from all the other throwable items in the game, and made it so it needs damage to build its charge? And I know I sound like a broken record right now, but Pyro doesn't deal damage, meaning you rarely ever get to play as quote-unquote support Pyro. All in all, at the end of the day though, I know Valve isn't going to change anything for the Pyro, for the better or for the worse, meaning he's always going to be the same. Complete and utter garbage. In all seriousness, really I just hope people understand the fundamental problems with Pyro in the game and just calm down when getting killed by them. Yes, we know Pyro is a class with a low skill ceiling. Yes, we know he relies on cheap gimmicks to actually be effective, and by God, yes, we know it isn't fun to play against him. But Pyro isn't a god. Those cheap gimmicks are an offset of a class that fails at something it's designed for, and if you somehow allowed a Pyro to walk up and WM1 you into a fit of rage, the blame genuinely isn't on the Pyro, but you. Especially if you're getting fucking killed by the sharpened volcano fragment. Jesus Christ, I gotta be fucking Jiminy Cricket because Wooden Boy Pinocchio over here just won't stop catching on fire to this bloody thing. Look at this guy.